Welcome back, Freedom Fighters, to this third edition of the freedomradio.org's Freedom Files. This episode, we will be discussing the implementation of Obamacare, specifically as it applies to us here in Kentucky, as Governor Beshear has already taken solid steps towards implementing this new law even before it has passed through the test of the United States Supreme Court. Kentuckians, do you support Obamacare? If not, it's time to wake up. Monday, May the 7th, was a meeting for a public meeting, as they put it, to discuss the ramifications of the implementation of the healthcare exchange system, which is a part of the Affordable Health Care Act, and that is one of the few things that the Affordable Health Care Act lays out as possibly a section that is run by the individual state. These healthcare exchanges, though, you have to remember, as just about any provision within Obamacare that allows the state to control something, it comes along with the provision that if the federal government decides that it's inadequate, that they can totally strike it down and force the state to do as they see fit. And of course, this causes us to question at this point, since 26 other states in the union at this point have either, started legislation or some sort of process towards fighting Obamacare at the state level, taking the power back from the federal government as it should be. Why is Kentucky and why is Governor Beshear saying, we're going to lay down and die? We're going to go ahead and pretend that there's no way that the Supreme Court could declare this unconstitutional, which, by the way, we all know that this bill, especially, of course, the individual mandate for every single person in the United States to have health care required by law. Now, we all know that that is not a part of our Constitution. We know that it is specifically stated in the Constitution that the government cannot force us to buy anything. FreedomRadio.org would like to thank David Adams of Kentucky Progress for breaking this news to us so that we could have the opportunity to go to Frankfort and fight this attack on our liberty. Now, David Adams, he's a great guy, a friend of mine. He's involved in the Republican Party heavily here with me in Jessamine County, and he sounded the warning for us. I'm just going to read a little bit of an excerpt here from his official announcement of what was going on. It started last week when a Kentucky Obamacare official, Chris Hazlett, quietly scheduled an auditorium in the State Transportation Cabinet Building for a public meeting discussing state activity in setting up a health insurance exchange in the state. Now, David and I assume some other people proceeded to, like I said, sound the alarm. Got the issue out on Facebook. We, organized an event and invited everybody we could think of, and there ended up being quite a few people there, which spoke, I feel, the majority opinion of the state of Kentucky. People that I could absolutely identify with, people that some people that I already knew, and very intelligent comments were made. Now that not on the part of the panelists, the government panelists that were there. Unfortunately, most of what they had to say seemed to consist of and something like that. So you have to understand that at this meeting, basically they were operating under the assumption that we've already decided Obamacare is good to go. We need to get ready for it. We need to do what we can at the state level to form up for this. And obviously the opinion of the majority of the attendees, the public attendees at this meeting, what they really wanted to get across was that this is not a constitutional act. This is not a constitutional bill. This infringes upon what is supposed to be a protected right of ours for freedom, and that we don't want it. We don't want it, and that we also know that not only do we not want it because we don't like to, because we shouldn't be forced into it according to the Constitution, but we also don't like it because we know what the government does when they take things over that used to be in the private sector. Now, granted, don't get me wrong, large corporations can tear through the private sector, and you know, of course, we know a few corporations, you know, Goldman Sachs, private corporations that we love to hate. But we have to understand that just because we don't like this aspect of this corporation, that we can't believe just by that logic that the government for some reason will do it better, because basically the government is just a big corporation, except they make the law. So what do you think happens when you allow that? When you allow the government to come in and control everything, you know, at that point they don't have to care what you think anymore. If you disagree with them, at this point they can lock you up forever and call you a terrorist. So we have to fight this. We have to fight this here in Kentucky. This is a call to action for all of you out there, all of you viewers who agree with me, to call Governor Beshear, to call your state representatives, to call your state senators, and tell them we don't want Obamacare. There has been no Kentucky legislation to that effect, and we want legislation to strike it down. We want to join the fight that many other states have started to fight this at the state level, to say the state has the right, to implement something like this if it's required, and we don't want the federal government involved. And let's not forget that in all likelihood the Supreme Court will declare the individual mandate if they have any sense, and I actually feel they have a little. If they do declare this law to be unconstitutional based upon the individual mandate, and this will not be an issue. However, if we continue to allow Governor Beshear and the state of Kentucky to implement this system, even, you know, if we allow them to implement this system, even in the face of opposition to Obamacare and the possibility of it being declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, at that point, if the system is already in place, Obamacare still gets struck down, we're still stuck with Obamacare in the state of Kentucky. This is why you need to pay attention. This is why you need to be out there screaming and telling everybody that you know that this is going on, and it's got to be stopped. It's got to be stopped now. This is a classic example of one of those slip it in the back door moves by our elected officials, trying to pull the wool all over our eyes just long enough to get something passed and get it in the books. And, you know, of course, it's much harder to strike down a law than it is to enact it, especially given the climate, you know, the government climate at this time. So now, we here at freedomradio.org like to be as honest as possible, so we would like to mention that there were a few people that attended the meeting that were interested in talking about the implementation of the exchange. in the same manner that the panel was interested in talking about it, as long as it operated under the presumption that it was going to happen and there was nothing we could do about it. But we're not going to show you those people speaking here because, just so you understand, freedomradio.org's position is to get rid of any law that infringes upon individual liberty as we understand it from the Constitution of the United States of America. So, that being said, there were some people there that were interested in Obamacare and implementing it. Now, I will say, just from my personal viewpoint, it seemed that most of those people were involved with either some sort of insurance company or lobbying for some sort of insurance company, or were from an area that is used to this type of socialized medicine, and therefore they were comfortable with it. So that's fine and dandy, and I absolutely and totally support their right to say what they had to say, but the vast majority of the people there were very opposed to this mandate, to this law, and to the implementation of these exchanges here in Kentucky. And just really to point it out, the panel was not interested whatsoever in speaking along those lines. Quite often, questions were either ignored or passed by. They were definitely not answered if they had anything to do with why are we doing this? Why don't we stop? Why don't we send this money back? Because let's not forget that Kentucky has gotten, and I've heard a few different numbers, it's at least 50 million, and it's up to 60 million. Okay, so I've heard a few different numbers, but that much money has been given to Kentucky from the federal government. Now, this money is supposed to be used for the implementation of this insurance exchange here in the state of Kentucky. Now, I'm not sure, but so far, of course, the only thing that's been done is this, this public panel, with the government officials, and the public discussion of how we should implement this, under the assumption that it's going to happen. And they've done studies. They've hired a company, and I can't remember their name. You'll see it in the interviews later on, to implement or to study and the trends and what will happen once these insurance exchanges, invade the free market. What kind of effect is that going to have on the free market? And I'm not sure how much money they spent, on this company that did these studies, but of course, one of the people that were there at the meeting asked the panel whether that information was available, and of course, the panel, resigned to say that they did not have that information available yet. It was not available yet. They thought they were going to have it, but they ended up not having it. And of course, I loved it because the guy, just shot it back at him so well. That, you've spent this money and we're implementing and we're talking about how to implement this system, but you don't even have the research done yet on what the effect is going to be on the free market, on everyone's pocketbook, and we're already talking about how to implement it. He knocked it out of the park. You'll see that later in the interviews, in the meeting footage that we have. And really, there were some really passionate speeches and questions asked, and of course we got no answers, but we did show them very, very, very fervently that we, as a majority, were not interested in implementing this, that we wanted to send the money back to the federal government and tell them they can keep it. We don't want it. We don't want your strings. We don't want everything that comes with it. We want to stay a sovereign state in the United States, and we want to run our own lives. Of course, again, as I said, they were totally not interested in hearing it. And
even though the constitutionality of the Affordable Health Care Act, also known as Obamacare, is still being debated in the United States Supreme Court, Kentucky has been the recipient of $55 million in federal grants. And that's just the beginning. These funds